Hello, and welcome to my lunar transit report for the third quarter moon taking place on June 28th, Friday at 3:54 p.m. Mountain Time. Okay, so before we take a look at the third quarter moon chart, I just want to go back for a few moments and take a look at the new moon and the full moon charts just to remind us of the lunar cycle that we've been participating in for the last 3 weeks. So we had this previous new moon in Gemini on June 6th. The highlights from this chart were that the new moon was conjunct Venus to the exact minute of the degree in Gemini. They were in gate 35, line 6. This is called the gate of progress. It's the end of our experiential journey of a cycle. And the idea is, have we had any progress here? So when I'm thinking about progress right now, I'm thinking about how have we been doing so far in this rave year? We have had overwhelming individual circuitry activated lunar cycle after lunar cycle. We also had the total solar eclipse in April when Chiron was in gate 51, exactly conjuncts that total solar eclipse to the minute. So these were initiations we were going through. So it's been a very deeply stimulating time to reflect on how have we been changing, how have we had life experiences offering us an invitation into our higher self truth, inspiration, and how we share that with the world. So on this new moon, we still had another individual channel. We had the channel of mutation, a design that fluctuates and mutates. This is the format channel for all individual circuitry. So again, here we were being stimulated this deep level, mutating into our highest vision of what we consider to be our ultimate inspiration and truth that we want to share with the world. And the new moon in that gate 35 with Venus indicates that we may be wanting and yearning. You know, Venus is what we want in life. So we can sense this desire to have balance and harmony with the progress that we've made going through some of these possibly cathartic experiences. Pluto was very connected to this new moon. It was in an exact square and a half to the degree. So it's really bringing in that gate 60 of acceptance, it's called, and the gate of limitations, part of this mutation. How have we overcome these limitations? How have we been able to grow and mature and develop as a result of them? And we also had the channel of the wavelength, a design of talent. With the south node in gate 48, this indicates that we may have access to these experiences in our past, that we may have gained some depth that we can now share in a talented and skillful way through gate 16, where Jupiter is. So I really felt like this cycle was a transition, right? A transition from what have we been going through internally and how do we evolve into our truth of expression and share that with others through this mutative process. As we look at the full moon for this cycle, which happened in Capricorn on June 21st at 7:07 p.m. Mountain Time, we can see that the moon had just crossed into Capricorn, and she was in gate 10, line 4. Gate 10 is in the higher self G center. It represents our higher self behavior. So I'm thinking about how has my attitude and how has my attitudes affected my behavior. There may have been some up leveling through these experiences we've been through. It's also called the gate of self-love. And it's been so important during these deeply turbulent and stimulating times to create a greater acceptance and degree of self-love. I really felt like that was her message here in the G Center, is that we can evolve, we can mutate based on the growth and development we've received through life experiences. Still had the channel of the wavelength with the South Node in gate 48 and Jupiter in gate 16. Um, and so, yeah, so I think the full moon being the culmination of the expanding lunar energy for the first 2 weeks of this cycle, now in Capricorn in the gate of self love. And I feel like her message was, and I'm speaking because of this association with the 10th house of Capricorn, ruled by Saturn. This is the house of vocation. This is how we shine out into the public world. So we've been going through a very inner world process, but this full moon is a time, or was a time, to celebrate, to be grateful from where we've been and where we've come, and how we might be able to externalize, line 4, this higher self behavior of self love that we may have developed at this period. And this brings us to the third quarter moon happening on Friday, June 28th. So when we look at the body graph, we can see that we still have that channel of the wavelength, the design of sharing talent, and we also have the channel of acceptance, the design of an organizational being. Both of these are collective channels. So the message of this third quarter moon is indicating some degree of sharing through our personal inner development. Also, want to add that yes, at this third quarter moon, she is returning home to her next new moon with the sun. So the third quarter moon is a dynamic time because the moon is squaring the sun, and squares promote dynamic growth and development. Often something needs to be resolved. So, in that sense, there's great energy from the luminaries to take agency during this waning phase. And so, when I say that, the waning phase is a time to review, to collect ourselves, to look back at the waxing phase, to think about the experiences we went through during the first half of the lunar cycle, and think about how we can integrate these now. How can we bring all that into our body, into our relationships? And really at this time, it's the idea of tending to our garden. Make sure we're watering and nourishing our soul, getting enough rest, really weeding the garden, making sure our boundaries and our relationships are emulating the life that we want to have and that we're sharing. And so in this waning phase, it's not necessarily about starting new projects. However, there is great agency to review and formulate and rest for the next cycle. Well, the sun at this third quarter moon happens to be in gate 52 in the root center. This is part of the format channel of all logical circuitry. And as I mentioned, the two channels, the wavelength and acceptance, are both in logical circuitry. So we still see a real alignment here around the thematics of our logical circuitry. And this has to do with patterns and refinement and perfecting how we share these patterns. Gate 52 is called keeping still, the mountain. It's that root adrenal pressure to actually stop and be still. And the image I get that comes to my mind is stop and smell the roses. For those of us in the northern hemisphere, we've had the solar summer solstice last week. So, we had the longest day of the year. We're basking in these long, warm days. And with the sun in gate 52 right now, yeah, I feel like we're getting the sun asking us to, take a break here, tend the garden, as I keep saying, to really reflect on where we are and observe our own patterns within our rhythm. That puts the earth in gate 58. This is the gate of the joyous. This is the pressure of the root center to improve in order to experience more joy. So, I think this idea of just taking our time right now, we're in the waning phase, is stop to smell the roses that we do have in our garden, to find the little things that we can appreciate, and really thank ourselves for the hard work that we've done to go through these very stimulating period of time. We can also say here we have another aspect. Mercury in gate 62 is square to Chiron in gate 42. Now, Chiron, as I mentioned, was in 51 for quite a while at the total solar eclipse. Deeply stimulating, cathartic invitation we had. Now, Chiron is in gate 42. This is called the gate of growth. This is the energy of the sacral center to bring a cycle to a close. So I think that's a big part of this message of this third quarter moon. How have we found new forgiveness for ourselves, for others, whatever experiences were brought up from our past during this lunar cycle that started with the channel of mutation? How are we able to move past that, to accept, surrender, mutate, and move forward with our voice of truth? Chiron providing its support in gate 42 and being square to Mercury in gate 62. This is part of that channel of acceptance with the moon in gate 17. So very connected to the moon herself at the third quarter. And Mercury in gate 62, Mercury is the planet of communication. It's in a throat gate expression. So here we have this double emphasis on maybe there'll be conversations, Mercury, related to past wounds and healing process, Chiron. And so there may be, I think a supportive tip would be to really listening to how we're sharing these old stories. We have changed at a very deep core level. At least we've had the opportunity to change. And if we have, are we still sharing old stories that are not in alignment with who our new self is? And if we hear that, just to recognize that we have a new story to tell, and our frequency of expression should match that. So I'd be listening very closely to how I'm telling old stories. Am I reframing them from a self-empowered way? That was a large keynote of the channel of mutation at the new moon. Empowerment. And if we're experiencing this newfound empowerment, then our stories should sound like that to our own ears. So I think that's a supportive thing to look at right now. We also have Mars in gate 2, the gate of higher knowing, the most receptive hexagram in all 64 gates, which is interesting because she's so receptive, the gate of higher knowing, but yet we have this powerful yang planet, Mars, and all its energy. So an interesting gate for Mars to be in right now. And he is sextile to Venus in Cancer in gate 39. So here we have our masculine archetype, Mars, and our feminine archetype, Venus, in a sextile, a free-flowing, supportive frequency of communication. Venus is in gate 39, pressurizing our drive and desire to experience our emotional spirit, this emotional struggle to find spirit. And so, as part of that message of Venus sextiling Mars in the gate in our G center of higher knowing, this all adds layers to this story of mutation, this opportunity to find this new sense of our personal higher knowing. We may have new perspectives right now. We may have a new sensation of this channel of acceptance. It's about our mental logic, gate 17, where the moon is. So she's bringing us this emotional frequency and possibly sharing with us how our own opinions may have changed through our attitudes changing, through our behavior changing, having gone through a portal of invitation or initiation over these past several months. Our logic, this channel of acceptance, we may have found a new logical acceptance to reframe this story of who we were, where we are, and where we're going. I hope you all have a wonderful third quarter moon, and to remember that in this final week of the lunar cycle, stop, smell the roses, take your time right now, enjoy the heat of the warm, long days in the Northern Hemisphere, and I look forward to seeing you again on our next new moon.